Hey there, GovTech Social. This is Anil Chawla with Archive Social and the GovTech Social podcast. Back at it in the month of June, talking about empowering and protecting open dialogue through the use of social media in government. Invited my friend Dustin Heisler to join the conversation. Thanks for joining, Dustin.
Good to be back.
I'm glad it is because this time we've got an interesting topic. One thing that we focus on every so often because it's so critical is this issue of policy, social media policy, the legal implications, and in general policy and guidelines to protect your agency's use of social media. I want to touch on that again with a little bit of flavor. And there's a particular group of constituents in terms of government staff that make policy a little more challenging than usual. I'm going to let you guess who I'm talking about there.
Well, you got to be talking about our elected officials.
How did you guess? So, obviously, we've had conversations about this. Elected officials are very interesting. And actually, for our audience, if you could, just give us a brief synopsis of why it is difficult to incorporate those elected officials into your social media policy.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, elected officials now use social media as a platform to campaign. And so, oftentimes they'll use these platforms to get the word out, to get people to come and vote. But what happens when they're elected? All of a sudden, those same platforms that are used personally to talk about why you should vote for them are now how they actually communicate about government business. And where it gets sticky is how do you actually maintain that conversation? If someone is in a council meeting, they're using their own personal Facebook page and they're communicating and corresponding with other council members, or maybe they're sending Facebook messages, whatever it might be, how do you actually maintain that record? And elected officials are early adopters of a lot of this technology, but they also tend to roll over quite a bit. So it creates a lot of challenges for government agencies with how do you keep up and how do you go to an elected official and say, hey, I need access to your Facebook page.
So that all makes sense. A lot of good reasons. They're not doing anything wrong here, but given that everybody in America is on at least Facebook and likely participating in other social channels, they will be too. And just given the nature of being elected and having this public-private interaction with the citizens, it does create challenges for everybody involved. Now, before we tackle that issue, let's just do a recap. It's always good to think back on the policy in general that an agency should have in place. So maybe rapid fire here, we can just mention a few things for our audience to keep considering and revisiting and updating in their social media policy. I can kick that off. Very much in line with this topic, one of the first things you want to have in your policy is information about acceptable use and drawing the line between personal and professional usage. What we've found working with attorneys across the country that work with government and private industry is that you want to be really careful in how you limit staff members, employees in terms of their own personal uses of social media. There are employee rights that you have to be cognizant of. You certainly want to draw the line, and when it becomes professional usage and you're representing that city, county, or public agency, there are rules that you need to follow, and you as an organization need to own that account and really own the way that account's used. So that's my first one. What do you have, Dustin?
You got to think about the public records law. And I think, when it comes down to both case law and public records law, I mean, anything you're doing to act on an official capacity of a government agency, whether you're using your personal Facebook, your personal email, or an official device is subject to open records and is thus a public record and is something that has to be maintained and archived. The law is very clear here, but it's a very important thing to remember because what do elected officials do? They talk about city business, and everything that they say on social media is an aspect and is a public record.
Well, you stole my favorite one, so I'm going to pick another hot button issue around First Amendment.
Like a boss.
Like a boss, absolutely. Well, I've got one around First Amendment. That one comes up pretty much as often as this issue of public records, and it's all about content that shows up on your social networking sites from the citizens. Hopefully it's mostly positive, but there will be those negative comments and those critical comments and unfortunately those profane comments. How do you deal with it? Can you deal with it? You do want to spell out your comment moderation policy in detail. Make it clear that it is a limited public forum that you'll moderate. So lay out the rules, and then of course you have to be good about enforcing it consistently and having the record keeping to demonstrate that you followed that policy. How about one more?
I think you gotta take into account the onboarding process for these elected officials. So when it comes to an elected official that has just, been newly elected, how do you actually educate them and get them onboarded and actually, into a system? And so I think the important thing here is, when it comes to open meetings law and open records law, many elected officials, in fact, all elected officials nationwide, are required to go through training through their attorney general, through their state attorney general, on the laws that are out there. And so during this time, I would actually encourage agencies to do the same thing with social media records. It's a great time to educate them on, hey, that Facebook message you're sending privately to people about city business, it's subject to open records. But it's also a great way to tap into and actually onboard their pages, their official pages, their private pages that they may be using as an aspect of a social media archiving solution. And so use it as an opportunity to do that. So get them acclimated with the open meetings law and open records law. And also, the fact that everything that they say and do, whether it's on their personal device or work device, if it's work related, is subject to open records.
That's a perfect segue there. And what you're calling out there is that registration process. In addition to training, having a registration process for everything, all of your social accounts, because it's so easy for someone to set up a Facebook page representing your entity. With a public official, it's a little more difficult because they may be going through that transition that you talked about. And so talking to them, though, that if you're going to represent our agency, there is a gate that you need to cross, and that gate involves a training. You will need to register your social media account with us, because if we are archiving for public records, we're monitoring, we're doing other things, we need to treat your account that's conducting public business just like anything else. So all that's really, really important. When we talk about public officials, one of the challenges there is that some public officials, like the governor of a state or the mayor of a city, they're a little more prominent. So there are some tips and tricks here. One of those is, if they are that prominent, then they probably should just have a dedicated Facebook page. Move them off that personal profile to that dedicated Facebook page. You can then apply all the policy and record keeping on that Facebook page. The question, Dustin, though, is most of the public officials are not that prominent. You've got the city council members, the county commissioners, and everybody else in between. How else might you deal with policy and legal issues as folks transition into public service and perhaps transition back out?
I think you train them on acceptable use. So, if they want to engage with the public, they need to define the channels that they're going to use. Social media is a great channel for that. And maybe they're not big enough to have their own, Facebook page for people to like, and they decide to use their own personal one. I think they just need to understand, the right ways to engage, and the fact that everything they say is subject to open records that way, and get them familiar with it up front, rather than, a surprise coming in the form of a legal subpoena.
Well, I like what you're saying there. Basically, draw the line. Make sure they know what the line is. Draw it. If a public official is conducting public business on their social media sites, that social media content is subject to all the rules and regulations, just like the rest of your content. Draw the line. Easier said than done. So what we want to hear from our audience is how you've tackled this with your public officials. Please leave your comments, and we look forward to speaking with you again next month here on GovTech Social.